Hey, this is Chris from the Kapstan team. I'm here to give you a quick demo of how to get started with Kapstan, as well as show you a template app that we've made to help speed up your development process with Kapstan. So just getting started looking at the environment we currently have set up, I have this Chris demo environment with no infrastructure and no apps created. I've gone ahead and connected to my AWS account, and I've also connected my GHCR container registry, and this will be important later when we're setting up our application. And so let's go ahead and just go over an overview for what we're going to provision today. So we'll be making a virtual network, a Kubernetes cluster, a queue, a TLS certificate, a database, and a cache. So really using a majority of the resources we have today. And we'll be cutting a bit in between just to skip some of the provisioning time, but I'll be going through all the arguments and everything that I'm putting in these. Let's go ahead and get started making a virtual network. We can give it a simple name, just say Chris Network. There's no arguments here. If we wait a second, we see the estimated cost, and we can go ahead and get this provisioning. So it's been about 5 minutes and the network is finished provisioning. Let's go ahead and make a cluster. So let's call it Chris Cluster. Again, give it a sec, we can estimate the cost. And we can also get a certificate provisioning because that can go in parallel. So I'll just say demo, I'll make the domain my name, and I'll just give it the demo subdomain, and we'll get that provisioning as well. And we're going to go ahead and just pause again, wait for the cluster to finish, and then we'll be able to make the queue, or the cache, the queue, in the database. So it's been a couple more minutes, and now our cluster is ready to go. Let's go ahead and start the provisioning of the rest of our resources. These we can all do in parallel because none of them depend on each other. So first, let's make a database. Keep the naming convention the same. Let's call it ChrisDB. I want to use Postgres, and I'll just use the smallest instance size right now. Go ahead and get that started. While that's going, we can also make a cache, same thing, just call it Chris Cache, and 512 should be fine. Let's get that started too. And then finally, let's make a queue. I want a Nats queue, I'm just going to call it Nats, and I don't need Jetstream or cluster mode, so we'll keep that way as well. And while these are all provisioning, let's go ahead and set up our application. So I can click create an application. It's going to be a container app. Let's call it Chris Server, why not? And then we can go ahead and add a container. I'll select my container registry connection from earlier. Select the image I built, and I'll just choose my latest image tag. That all looks good. So let's start with environment variables. We'll go through the code repo in a second, but I've gone ahead and just copied a blank environment variable file here. So we can just go ahead and hit open, and I'll just leave these as placeholders for now, because we need to wait for our queue, our cache, and our database to finish provisioning. But we'll just go ahead and save this for now, just to make it simple. Next, for ports, my server has one port, and it's under 8080. We're going to want to expose this to the internet, so I'm going to make this public. And the root path is fine, so I'll just save it right there. Since we want to expose it publicly, we need an ingress too, so we'll click on enable ingress, internet facing. My server only does HTTP. And then we need a TLS certificate. So the certificate is for me to connect to it, and then this upstream protocol is for the ingress to connect to the server. So this seems fine. I'll go ahead and click save. And then our queue is finished. So we can go ahead and copy the URL and paste it. Let's see, which queue address, here we go. Paste it right there. And then our database and our cache will take a little bit longer. So we'll go ahead and give those a couple minutes. A couple minutes later, and the database and cache are done provisioning. And so I've gone ahead already and copied all of the relevant environment variables over. And so we can see here everything is filled out. Just need to add the port there. So let's go ahead and deploy it, and while it's doing that, we can go over briefly what this application does. Let's go and click deploy. And while it's happening, we can go here. So this is our Go template app. It's a sample Go server application that can help kickstart your development process with Kapstan. So it uses Echo, a web framework in Go. It's set up to store data in Postgres, use Redis as a distributed cache, and use Nats as a message queue. So I'm not going to go through in depth, but essentially we have a couple dummy APIs that we can look at here. So we have a store book, get book, list book, and delete book. Let's go and check on the state of our deployment. We can see it's completed. If we go into config and we go into ingress, we can see the endpoint. Typically for a production setup, you would probably want to actually update your CNAME and have this be routed through the domain that the certificate is signed for. But since we're just doing this as a demonstration, I think it's fine to just ignore the verification for TLS. So let's go ahead and jump into an API client to interact with our application. So I'm using Postman here, but anything would work. The application is essentially like a dummy library, dummy bookstore. And so we have this books endpoint, which we can see what's currently in store. We have an add endpoint where we can add new books. And we can see these are now in there. And we also have a delete endpoint so we can clear books out of the bookstore. So putting that there. We can see what's removed. If we go back into Kapstan, we can use the logs feature to drill down on specifically what our application is logging. So if I just want to see, the created events, I can do 201. And I can see all these status 201 events referring to different API calls. And that concludes the demo. I hope this was helpful.